Welcome to the Balance and Bliss podcast. I'm your host, Andrea, a 3-time published author, speaker, and a lifestyle transformation coach who believes everyone should be given the gift of knowing how to live their lives feeling healthy and empowered. Things like moving your body regularly and fueling it well, taking care of your mind, setting boundaries, practicing self and body acceptance, personal growth, manifestation, and everything in between. Wellness is not linear, and it's not just one thing. It expands into so many areas, and on this show, we're going to talk about just that. We're all striving to live a little more healthy and a little more well, but what does that even mean? My goal is to help you see that you can move from the mundane to the magic when it comes to living aligned and fulfilled, and by tuning in each week, you can be assured you'll leave with nuggets of wisdom that you can implement into your day-to-day, like right now, to help you maximize your health, wellness, and your life. Now let's dive in.
Hello there. Welcome back to another week. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you're having a pretty awesome day. I actually didn't even plan to record today, but there have been times the last couple of weeks where Mike has been home early, and so when he's home early, I try and slip downstairs and get something recorded here for you. So I'm pretty excited to have this conversation today. I'm just in this moment reflecting back on how season 3 has been so far, and it's been really cool having these conversations. We've been having lots of body conversations. Of course, there have been some reruns in there as well, but I hope that you've been enjoying it as much as I have. You know, my goal with this show really is to connect with you, to give you information that you maybe haven't had before. You know, that whole idea, like I say, that wellness is something that we're kind of all striving to achieve, and it feels like some big goal that's far out of reach, and you look at other people and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like they have it all together. But the reality is that nobody has it all together all the time. And so one of the big parts of wellness, of course, is understanding that people can fluctuate up and down, and knowing what to do in those up and downs, and not always feeling like you have to have it together. And so I hope that you enjoy listening to each of these episodes every week. Today is going to be, I actually alluded to this episode a couple weeks ago when we did the rerun of our marriages and our relationships, and Kim and I talked about our partnerships and what we do to kind of help us stay connected. The reality is that there is no such thing as happily ever after, and let's chalk that up to another thing that the media and movies make us believe, is that you find your person, and if it's meant to be, then it's going to be easy. That's just not the case, right? If you have been in any sort of long-term relationship, you know that there are ups and downs, and there's constant work that you have to be putting into it. And I'm a very firm believer that even the strongest of relationships take work, right? Because when you make a commitment to somebody, you get married, or you decide that you're going to stay committed long term, you are one person. And then as, life happens and experiences happens, you are constantly evolving, you're constantly growing and changing as individuals. And so as you're changing as an individual, then of course the way that you show up in your relationship is different, and your needs might change. And, you may feel more comfortable communicating your needs when you haven't been before. And of course, as your needs are changing, you have to tell your partner what you need. Otherwise, of course, you're going to, instead of grow together, you're going to grow apart. And this is where relationship tools can be really valuable and really helpful. So when I say relationship tools, there are a ton of relationship tools out there. There's quizzes, there's personality tests, there's obviously therapy, there are, retreats and workshops, and even just talking with other couples. I know that I find that that's really helpful. When we get together with girlfriends, obviously you talk about your partners. But even just sharing, what's working, what's not, how we're feeling about things, knowing that other couples have ups and downs as well can actually be quite validating, because, if maybe you're going through a tough time with your spouse, you might think, oh my gosh, are we the only ones that are going through this? And of course we never see other couples argue, or maybe we do, but it's not often that we see those really big blowouts and those really tough conversations, right? Those typically happen behind closed doors. And, I'm thinking about situations where, Mike and I have been like, we needed to be somewhere, whether it's just the two of us or whether it's with the kids, we need to be somewhere. Getting out the door is a gong show. Maybe we're arguing and bickering and we're fighting in the car on the way there. But then when you get to where you're going, right, when you're in front of other people, then you put on that happy face and you act like everything's okay. And you might be side-eyeing each other across the room. But for the most part, you're not really showing other people the ins and outs of navigating and managing your relationship. So even having conversations with other people about what works for them, what hasn't worked for them, all of those sorts of things can be really helpful. So the tool that I'm going to talk about today is the love languages. And this is a book. So that's how I first originally learned about the love languages. Was somebody recommended the book to us. And I remember I was recommended this book at a time where this was shortly after Clara was born. And, if you remember having your firstborn, your life gets completely turned upside down, right? You're trying to navigate what it's like having a new baby, being parents, you're sleep deprived. And then at some point you also have to include focus on your relationship in there. And it was challenging for us at that time. We kind of lost sight of each other a little bit. And I remember one of the moms in our mom group recommended this love languages book. So I actually borrowed it from her. Brought it home. We read it. We did the quiz. And then, of course, it gives you a foundation of how you can kind of move forward in your relationship. So the love languages were developed by Dr. Gary Chapman, and I'm going to share some resources as it relates to the love languages in the show notes. So you can check those out when you're done this episode. You can take the quiz yourself. You can have your partner take it so you can start to understand what their languages are and what fills their love tank, which I will explain in a little bit. But Dr. Gary Chapman is a therapist, and he worked for decades with couples. And he saw couples who were struggling, couples who came to him and had this, they were set that they were not going to be together anymore. They were not going to be moving forward with their relationships. And he actually, in working with them and in working with all of these different couples, developed this way, these tools of working together in a relationship with somebody. So he gives a lot of history about the development of this in his book. And he actually gives examples of, obviously he changes the name, but of couples that he's worked with and how they've kind of been able to move forward in their relationship using the love languages strategy. So there are 5 love languages. I'm going to tell you what those 5 love languages are, and then I'm going to kind of explain to you a little bit what does it mean, a love language? Maybe you've never heard of this concept before, or you've kind of heard of it a little bit, but you're not super familiar. So there are 5 love languages. And when I say love languages, we're looking at things like acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, and physical touch. And I like to think of the love languages as actual languages. So English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever it is. If you have a specific language that you speak, and you are trying to speak to somebody else in your language, so I am English speaking, I'm trying to speak to somebody in English who only understands and responds to Spanish, we're going to have a really hard time communicating with one another, because I'm going to be talking to them in English. They're not going to know what I'm saying, what I'm asking for, what I need. And in turn, if they're trying to speak to me in Spanish, I'm not going to be able to understand what they're saying. I know a few words and that's about it, but I'm not going to be able to communicate with them and ensure that they're getting what they need. And it's kind of the same with the love languages. So Mike and I know and have learned what each other's love languages are. And if I was speaking to Mike in a language that does not resonate with him in terms of how he likes to be shown love and affection and appreciation and all those sorts of things, if I'm not speaking his language, then it's falling on deaf ears and vice versa. And so if I'm trying to speak to him, let's say in my love language, and that's not something that he connects with, then we're going to be in this situation where he doesn't feel like I appreciate him or like I'm showing up for him the way he needs. And I'm going to feel like, I'm putting all this effort in and he's not feeling it or he's not reciprocating. And there starts to be some conflict and you don't understand why and all of these sorts of things. So there's those 5 love languages that I mentioned, and I'm going to go into each of those. But the other thing that Dr. Gary Chapman talks about is having a love tank. And this is the similar to, say, a gas tank in a car. So if your gas tank is not full, then your car is not going to run. And the more gas that's in your tank, obviously, the better your car feels. I'm using air quotes here. The better your car feels, and the more likely it is to be able to run and to be able to continue to move forward. Well, the love tank essentially says that if you're not consistently pouring into your partner's love tank through one of their love languages, whatever their love language is, then they're going to feel really depleted. And if you think about when you feel really depleted, when you feel unappreciated, when you feel unacknowledged, when you don't feel like you're getting what you need from somebody, that doesn't really make you feel motivated to want to show up then for them, right? You feel like they don't see you. You feel like they don't hear you. You feel like they're not there for you. And so when you can understand someone's love language, then you can do small things that will fill up their love tank. I'm going to give you an example. So receiving gifts is one of my love languages. And it's interesting because just before I recorded this episode, I did the quiz again because I was curious to see where I was at in terms of my love language. Because the other thing to know is that your love language may change. Again, as you change and grow and evolve as a person, your love language may change as well. And so if you know what your love languages are, sometimes it's cool to do the quiz again. So let's say if you've done it, maybe you can go through and do the quick 5-minute quiz in the show notes at the end of this. But I redid my love languages, and receiving gifts actually isn't my top one anymore. It's actually my second. But nevertheless, receiving gifts, essentially it means that sometimes it is about the physical gift. Absolutely. And I used to struggle with receiving gifts being my primary love language because I was like, oh, how vain of me to materialistic things. But it's actually more than that. It's the acknowledgement that when this person was not with you, they thought of you enough to go out of their way to get something for you that would make your day, that would make you happy, that made them think of you. It's really like a visual symbol of their love. So because we know that receiving gifts was my love language, here's the example of how Mike in the past has filled my love tank. So one day he came home with a leaf blower. I was absolutely I loved it. And I actually think that I shared this a couple weeks ago on the podcast episode. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But he came home with a leaf blower and I felt so appreciated and I felt so thought of because weeks earlier I had said, oh my gosh, it would be so nice to have a leaf blower so I don't have to sweep off the deck or sweep off the porch. I can just blow it off. And so he came home with a leaf blower that he was just happened to be at Canadian Tire for work. And he saw the leaf blower and he thought of me and he decided to pick it up and brought it home. And he actually put a little note on it that said, I hope this fills your love tank. So it wasn't about, it was about the leaf blower. Obviously, I was pretty pumped about it, but it was more than that. It was that I had mentioned it, that he remembered it, and that he then acted upon that and got the leaf blower while he wasn't with me and then brought it home to me. And it just it made my day. I swear it filled up my love tank for the week. But you can once you understand someone's love language, then you can start to do things that speak their language, right? You want to speak to someone in their language instead of speaking to them in your own. And when you speak to them in their love language, it will fill up the love tank. So, what are the 5 love languages? As I said earlier on, we've got acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, and physical touch. I've already explained receiving gifts to you a little bit. Again, receiving a gift is not necessarily about the material of the gift, but more it's a visual representation of the thoughtfulness that they had for you when they were not with you. It's like, hey, we weren't even together and you thought of me and you brought this to me. Acts of service is the second one. So acts of service is the whole idea that actions speak louder than words. So an act of service might be filling up your car for you, filling up the gas tank, literally filling up a tank for you when they're out with your vehicle. It might be switching over the laundry for you. It might be cooking dinner for you. It might be taking out the trash without you having to even ask, like really doing practical things that help to relieve and lessen your load. That's kind of the way that I look at it. And again, the whole idea of actions speak louder than words. It's not just saying, I'm going to do the thing, but instead it's actually doing the thing. And again, they have taken a moment out of their day to do something that's going to make your life easier. And again, in doing that, that's them saying, I love you. I want things to be easier for you. And I'm going to do this act of service for you. The third love language is quality time. So quality time, if you are somebody whose primary love language is quality time. Oh, and the other thing that I didn't mention is when it comes to the love languages, you often will have a primary love language, but then you will have like a secondary love language and maybe even a third love language. Again, it depends on what your quiz results are. So like I said earlier, my first one was receiving gifts, and my secondary love language was acts of service, and that's actually shifted a bit now. So my quiz results from today, 30% of me loves acts of service, so that's my primary love language. Receiving gifts comes in at 26%, so not far behind, still pretty similar in terms of priority of primary language. Physical touch is after that at 19%, words of affirmation, and then quality time. So quality time means spending dedicated, focused, uninterrupted time with your partner. So if you are somebody that values quality time as your primary love language, then you want to have those regular date nights. You want to have those evenings or weekends or afternoons where you and your partner can be together doing something, whatever it is, and really engaging in meaningful, connecting conversation, or being in each other's company and presence. And this is without kids. This might be, again, maybe not checking your phones, leaving your phones in a different room, but really, really spending that quality time in the name, with each other. And that is really what fills your love tank. So, if you have one night a week where you cook dinner together, or you watch a movie, maybe if that's what you want, or you have conversation, or you play a game, or you do a love languages quiz, like whatever it is, the importance of quality time is that you are spending uninterrupted, focused time where you can reconnect with one another. And you can see where this might be challenging, right? Because if one partner values of the utmost value for them, it's their primary love language is quality time, and the other partner is like quality time isn't even on their radar. If it's not on their radar, then obviously they're not going to be making it as much of a priority. But when you start to understand that your partner's love language is quality time, then saying to them, hey, tonight's free, let's go out for dinner tonight. I'd really love to spend some time with you. Somebody who loves quality time, that is going to fill up their love tank in a way that's going to really allow for the two of you to be reconnected. The fourth love language is words of affirmation. So again, earlier I said actions speak louder than words for acts of service. Well, this one's actually the opposite. So words of affirmation says that this person, your partner, needs to be spoken to a lot. So frequent I love yous. A lot of, hey, I really appreciate what you've done for me. I love you. You look great. Oh my gosh, you did such a good job at that. I'm so proud of you. Somebody whose primary love language is words of affirmation, they really, really appreciate verbal reinforcement. And so if your partner is saying things to you like, I feel like you don't appreciate me, you never tell me, that I'm doing a great job, or you never say I love you, and there's some conflict around that, it's likely because maybe their love language is words of affirmation, and it's not something that is top of mind for you as a partner, for that other partner, to ensure that that love tank is being filled up. And the last one is physical touch. So nothing speaks more volumes to somebody who loves physical touch than touching. And yes, absolutely, this can mean sex and intimacy in that way, like actual sex and sexual relations. But it also just means like, do you have that friend? I am this friend. I am this friend. Anyone that knows me knows I am this friend. But do you ever have somebody who sits like really close to you, let's say, or will often like put their hand on you? I always joke because I have a couple friends who like we full on snuggle. If we're sitting on the couch, or if we're hanging out, or if we're having a girls' night or whatever, then we will be snuggling. We will be laying on each other or legs on each other. Actually, my one friend her and I really like to snuggle. We went to a cottage weekend one time, and her and I actually like fell asleep spooning on the couch in the living room because we just, I don't know, we like to snuggle, and both of us were away from our partners that night, and we were like, oh, we miss cuddling. Anyway, so yeah, physical touch is like sitting on the couch and your feet are touching, or giving back rubs or foot rubs or neck massages, or rubbing their back when you walk past them in the kitchen, or like anything where you're physically touching each other for a short period of time, holding hands for an extended period of time, snuggling, touching, all of those sorts of things would be somebody who likes physical touch. So again, you can see where conflicts might arise here. Let's say somebody is not a touchy-feely type of person. I went out Oktoberfesting back in October, and one of the girls that I was with, I learned about her that she actually doesn't like to hug. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, I'm sorry if I've ever hugged you before. And she's like, well, no, it's fine. Like I'll stand there and I'll stiffen up and I'll take it, but it's not like I'm going to give you a huge warm embrace back or anything. So if you're one half of a partnership who doesn't like physical touch and is not a touchy-feely person, or maybe you are being the default parent all day and you are completely touched out by your children, and then your spouse comes home and they want to hug and you're not into it, and then there starts to be like, well, why don't you want to hug me? Why don't you want to snuggle? But the other partner is just like feeling completely touched out. There could be some conflict if you don't know that your partner's primary love language is physical touch, right? Maybe when they come home, or when you guys are reunited, maybe they need to have like a really long, lingering embrace, right? I often love when Mike and I, instead of that like quick little hug, we'll have like a good solid like 10, 15 minutes. I mean, wow, that would be a really long hug. Like 10, 15 seconds of like a solid hold. You stay there. You bask in it. Like that awkwardly long hug time. I'm an awkwardly long hugger. And it's funny because during the pandemic, earlier on in the pandemic rather, I didn't see my brother for a really long time. Well, not a super long time, but in the beginning when we were kind of all staying away from each other and not having that physical contact, one of the things that I missed was like his hugs, because he's definitely like a long hugger like I am. So we always have good hugs. But yeah, so physical touch is something that can be really, really important for somebody to feel completely connected. So again, in summary, all of those love languages are as follows. We have acts of service, service, receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch. Again, I shared with you earlier on that that my top love languages are acts of service and receiving gifts. Mike's are physical touch, like number one for him, and words of affirmation. I'm curious, after going through these descriptions, what do you think your love language is? What do you think your partner's love language is? And have you ever been in a situation where there has been maybe some conflict around either of these things? So I encourage you, check out that quiz, figure out what your love language is, send me a DM, let me know what your love language is, and really spend some time doing this with your partner, because it's a really simple way of getting reconnected and figuring out easy ways that you can fill up each other's love tank. When Mike and I actually first learned about this concept, we put our love languages on the fridge. It was like, here's my primary love language, here's my secondary, here are yours. That way it was like in our face, a reminder, a regular reminder of how we can connect with each other and make sure that we are filling up each other's love tanks. Because let me tell you, going back to the beginning of this episode, when I said that there's no such thing as happily ever after, and that relationships take work, we can get so stuck in the day in and day out. I mean, there's so much happening, especially if you have businesses and children or parents that you're caring for, or pets, or tons of obligations. You know, a lot of things are going on that oftentimes our relationship falls to the background. And if you want to live in an existence where you have a really strong relationship, when you're really connected, acknowledging that there are always going to be ebbs and flows, but if you have a foundation of consistently checking in with one another, consistently trying to show up for your partner in a way that makes them happy, like, how can I make Mike happy today? What could I do that would make his day? Something as simple as, like, in the mornings, if I'm up before him, which I often am on the weekends, I'll just make him an espresso, and then I just give him an espresso. And that simple thing, like, how can I make my partner's day better, is another really great question to ask. And that could be, how can I fill their love tank today? But I encourage you to take this that you've learned today, take it to your partner, because at the end of the day, if you're thinking about your overall health and well-being, having a strong, connected relationship and partnership can really contribute to that. So thanks so much for being here today. Check out those resources. Let me know what your love language is, and we will catch you next week. Take care.
Thanks so much for being here. I hope you're leaving with a full heart, some inspiration, or you're feeling the kick in the butt you felt like you needed. If you really enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend, or let me know. Rates, reviews, subscribing, and sharing are all great ways to support the show. And if you want to stay in touch, follow me over on Instagram at the.balance.bliss. Thanks for listening today, and stay well.